Well, welcome to another episode of the Manufacturing Margin. And my guest is Tim Olson, who is a fellow a bit experienced in standing up for the interests of manufacturers and companies trying to get a better margin with experience in both automation and accounting. His firm, Accounting Software Advisors, works with larger firms who often have custom requirements. And why don't you speak a little bit, Tim, in terms of what your experience has been in terms of working with, manufacturing and automation and all of that stuff in the last few
Okay.
years?
Okay. Well, I started working with manufacturers in the 90s, so there's about 30 years or better. Um, and the primary focus has been I've uh, I've always believed you have to have a solid foundation for anything to build anything. That could be a house, it could be a vehicle, a business. I mean, and the foundation for any business is a good accounting ERP system. And so that way you can streamline your processes. You're able to have a centralized database that everybody can access and get information. And so I've helped companies with that. And then from that, there's a lot of analytics you can perform that once you find these analytics, these business drivers, you're able to help a company achieve better profitability and which therefore sustains their business and through good times or bad and helps them grow and achieve the goals that they want to as business owners.
Yeah. What do you think, in your experience, has been the biggest points of leverage where folks, both in the aspect of diminishing a liability or in terms of increasing ROI or increasing asset?
Well, right around the turn of the century, when there was a little down tick in the economy and stuff, I worked with clients on their customer margin, identifying the margin that each customer brings to the business. Because when you have I call it I work with family owned or privately held businesses. So they're not businesses trading on the stock exchanges. And for those businesses, everything is a limited resource.
Right.
They're not hundreds of millions in size. They're usually 10 to 100 million.
Right.
And so they've got a limited number of products, they've got a limited number of customers, they've got a limited number of employees to service these customers and to make the product and distribute the product. So they need to focus on which customers are driving the margin for them. And then they need to have those tough conversations with those customers that are not driving margin to either, the worst side is you part ways, hopefully part as friends, but you adjust the pricing or adjust some other services so that the customer can be profitable for you. And that's probably been the biggest. Um, uh, in that same vein of margin, you can also look at territories or regions or business units within the company. You can look at each salesperson that you have within the company, and you can look at your product line if you have multiple
Right.
product lines.
I
So,
mean, one of the things that's only once you start getting the metrics back, you know, a lot of what in traditional accounting doesn't get accounted for is a lot of the soft costs, that really drag down the profitability of a company
right,
because they don't look at this. They're like, well, we've had that customer for 20 years. And it's like, yeah, but they always ask you to make it twice. And they
right,
always, you know,
right, right. I had during that time, I had a client that I really worked with because they had just lost their largest customer, which was about 35% of their gross revenue, and they were in panic mode to begin with. There were three owners, and but then all of a sudden, about 3 to 6 months later, they realized, well, hey, wait a minute. We still have cash in the bank. Actually, we have more cash in the bank than we had before. None of us are going crazy trying to keep up with all the work. And so they started asking the questions, why is this? And so they did the work, and I helped them with some data, with tools on how to analyze the data. But what they found was this customer that they lost, they had a margin of basically zero, and it was taking up a third of their labor time, which wasn't part of that calculation because they
right,
were just looking at the cost of the good that they purchased
right,
and what they were selling. So they had extra trucks to deliver product. They had overtime because they didn't have enough people. The customer always demanded immediate deliveries, and you know, so when they realized this, they then went on a deep analysis on every customer, and once they, you know, the old line, you measure twice and cut once type thing. Once they'd analyzed that data, they then went back to some customers and had, but like they said, it wasn't a difficult conversation because they had a report right there that showed the numbers.
right, right.
And so they were able to, work with their other customers, and they were actually more profitable, and eventually got bought out by a big player here in the Chicago marketplace.
Hmm. No, I mean, when small, medium-sized businesses strategically use this automation, it ends up putting them in a position where they can scale. They become much more interesting as a purchase asset by, or just in terms of a growth opportunity, whether it's, staying in the family business and just moving to the next generation.
Right, right. I Last year I implemented a system for a company, then and its second generation has just taken over the business, and they've never, well, they had one of the smaller product lines, and they never really put a good system together. They really never had data granularity that you could look at. The net result is this year, after implementing it last year, this year their bottom line is about 8 to 10% higher.
Right, right. And
And
I mean, when people look at, you think of that investment that again, a small, medium-sized business often are very reticent to do. They're like,
oh,
well, we'll buy a big computer, but I don't want to spend a lot on software or consulting. And
right,
it's like, if you spend just a few percentage points properly, you're going to increase your
right,
margin.
right, right. I mean, there. If I think about the difference right there, they've got close to a 10x on their spend of my services this year in their margin increase.
Right, right,
And that's allowing them now. We're starting to look at forecasting out into next year, and you know can they bring on new sales personnel? Um, can they start having real conversations with buying out prospective competitors in different marketplaces? And these are all real conversations they can have because they have some numbers and they have increased their profitability.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the other pieces which I think people don't understand how significant it is that this stuff, when done properly, puts the company in such a position of stability. It's like what isn't really talked about right now is, I think, a lot of unbooked liabilities. I
Oh yeah.
mean, all you have to do is look at the whole hacking thing, and it's like, these are things, if you talk to somebody with expertise, right, they're like, the budget is unlimited because we can't afford to have this destroy us be destroyed by this. So, I mean, there are places where, to understand the impact of what these hidden liabilities are and the impact of responding to them, I mean, like you were saying, the whole thing of having, when you have the metrics there, then you can have push communications where production managers learn something before it becomes a crisis, where the accounting and the CFO learns something before, again, it gets into just underwater.
Well, and what I look at with clients, because I do uh, a lot of forecasting for them, is I tell them, I said, this is going to allow you to drive your business instead of your business driving you.
Right.
And I want to back up to a point. You talk about this unbooked liabilities. I had a client, actually, it's a group of three clients that uh, the system is in a data center, and so they all access the same system. So you've got about 20 users at any given time on the system, and there was a ransomware attack. Now, because of the data center scenario, there was a backup. They could identify the exact time when that happened, and they had a backup just a few hours prior to that, and didn't have to succumb to any ransom money, but they had to restore,
Right.
the virtual machine, and they lost 1 day of access to their ERP system as a result of that. And maybe that could have rolled over faster if they wanted to spend more on that data center hosting. But the fact that they could keep it isolated, you know, and even though it's an unknown liability, as you say, now they've got experience to know that this can happen. This is what it's going to cost me, and
Right.
they can make some decisions on, do they want to change their service level.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I think, with the during COVID, the amount of marketing that was done by the big ERP companies and business software companies, that really just gave everybody should get on SaaS. And when you understand that from a liability standpoint, if you're the CFO, if you're the owner, think about putting your most sensitive data on an exposed location. I mean, this is what Microsoft and these guys don't tell you, which
Right,
is they can't protect it. It's like, so, the thing of understanding what a hybrid connection is, where your most sensitive things, keep it local, keep it on a local external server, but don't put it into these places where, God knows what can happen. I mean, it's like, it's hard enough to protect yourself if you're doing all the best things.
right, right.
But to imagine that these giant behemoths of IT companies actually know your name and care about it is like,
Makes you starts to make you wonder, doesn't it?
well, and it just like how successfully they got manufacturers, distributors, everybody to believe SaaS is the only way. You've got to do it because nobody wants to, run anything themselves anymore. And it's like
Yeah,
there was a good reason that people brought stuff locally.
right.
Some things put on the internet, I'm fine putting maybe my production schedule and, um, certain aspects. But again, not my GL, you know.
Yeah, I think that I've always taken the approach of the application determines where you want to host it. You know, you take an ERP. I agree with an ERP system. I think should be locally. Now, it might be that if you've got multiple business units scattered about the country or the world, um, you do have some decisions to make, but you can still have a virtual server in a data center,
Right.
uh, and it's your own box, and you're going to have a lot probably better security. More than likely, you're going to have better security, and you're going to have a faster internet access to that box. You take a CRM product, that almost has to be in the cloud because you've got salespeople that are on the road. They want, they want to be able to get to it on their phone, um, their iPad, their laptop, whatever it is. That is an application that probably needs to be in the cloud for
Totally.
companies.
Totally.
Um,
But that's a perfect example, which is that is the stuff that anybody should be fine. That's the stuff to expose. Let all my sales guys see what they need to see, so that let my
right,
customers see what they need to see. But
right,
again, I don't need to show my payroll. I don't need to show my my bookkeeping,
right,
to
right,
everybody.
right, right. And most privately held companies, they don't want that. That's why they stay private.
Right.
You know, they're, and so um, and so that even internally that causes some work to be done because you the best run companies, I always say, you keep the employee up to date on, give them metrics to shoot for and stuff. So now you've got financial metrics that you don't want to show them, but you got to figure out what metrics from that can you pull so that you can show them that they're either doing a good job or they're behind schedule or they're above cost or whatever you need to whatever message you need to convey to them.
I mean, that's why, this is a point we brought up in other episodes of this, but that analytical phase of really understanding what the real rules that are driving the business, not the things that are discretionary or something, but the things that have to be there to maintain a quality control or stay on production schedule. Those are the things that have to be understood by us who are implementing these things so that it can be done right. And it's like to imagine that somehow a software company has figured this out for you, knowing what you need to do is just so it's I mean, it's amazing how many people still are running on QuickBooks. God bless them. But who are running 10 and 20 million dollar companies. But it's like when you understand, like, you could get a huge bigger chunk of value benefit in most cases by make this stuff so that it isn't just the owner operator in the back office doing it, or the production manager, or the sales,
Right,
the lead sales guy.
right,
I mean, because, like, even though these companies might be 50 million or 30 million, what you find is it's composed of five key individuals, or maybe four, or maybe three.
yeah, yeah,
So it's like if we don't get that knowledge into the automation, it means, Bob never gets a vacation. You
right,
know?
exactly. And going back to a previous topic, that's a huge liability for the owner of the business,
Right,
and that they need to understand and plan on how they're going to mitigate.
right.
Um,
No, and they don't see. Sometimes people have not sort of done the math in terms of what is the impact if I don't do that. And it's
right,
like you could just drop I mean, I interviewed an owner this happened to them, and it's like they didn't plan. Their entire asset has has shrunk to a third of what it was, because they lost control of what they were doing here, you know.
Well, that's the thing that I see the most when I'm putting in new systems is, and it kind of goes in hand with your comment about companies don't want to spend the money on the consulting to get it implemented properly. And so they put it off and they put it off and they put it off. And then all of a sudden, all the work they've been doing and the inertia that they've been building up in their company, just, the top blows off. They get that huge contract they've been working on for 4 years.
Right, right.
And all of a sudden the reality hits them like, oh, how am I going to deliver this? And why is everything take so long here? Why do I have to go around and tell everybody everything to do on a constant basis? And, so we, that's usually when they finally succumb to, you know, pulling guys like you and I in. And, you know, it makes the whole process stressful for everybody
Yeah, yeah.
because it needed to be done last year
Or 10 years ago.
or 10 years ago, whatever. Uh, and I've joked with clients, I said, someday I'm going to figure out how to walk in and flip a switch and you're live running and we've gone through that implementation. I said, when I do that, that's the last one I'll ever do because you'll pay deeply. Um, so,
Yeah, well, I mean, this stuff. I mean, and that's the thing. What's nice, and having done this for a few years, what you see is the companies who do this properly, and they're like, I am so happy. What a brilliant spend. It's none of this like whining over, God, software costs so much, or like, automation is such a drag. And it's like, this has made my company about 10 times better. And
right.
it's also lowered the stress. I mean, when you think back, I mean, I think of companies who I took from paper to full automation. And it's like, what people don't remember is that the 1950s and 60s and before, maybe you didn't have automation, but you had three extra clerks working or two secretaries, or, you had people doing these jobs so it wasn't so stressful. Now you're trying to run the same business with half of the people some of the time.
Well, and I think that what gets lost in all this is the business processes. You just talked about, you take back in the 50s, 60s, whatever. Yes, there were people, but every one of them had defined process. They had to get done for the next person, for the next person. Then you throw computers at it, and people seem to forget that you've got to marry what that software company envisioned is what you need with what you're doing to get them. And you may have to change your processes to fit the software,
Right.
or you got to change the software to fit your process. Otherwise, you're not going to accomplish that goal that you're asking for.
And I mean, again, when you look at the impact on accounting, and just to, you know, the impact of saying to you, why don't you just change your workflow? We've got, you should comply with our software. It's like, it's to deny what that owner operator has innovated for the last 20 years, which
Bingo, bingo.
we've got to do it this way, or else we're just like our competitor or whatever.
Exact,
You know?
exactly. And that's actually the key, um, probably the key thing that guys like you and I have to identify
Absolutely.
for our client is what is that unique proposition you have that differentiates you from your other competitors, and how can we automate that?
Right. Right.
And
I mean, and half of the time, the owners, they know it in their heart or somewhere, but a lot of times this has not been clearly articulated. So,
Exactly.
I mean, what folks don't understand is you can't automate what you can't articulate,
Correct.
and if you know, it's why this role that we play of okay, I understand what you strategically want. Now, what about this and what about that? And can you really do this? And don't you
Hmm.
have to consider that? You know, that's the stuff that has to be done here, or
Right.
it doesn't
Right.
work. And you
Right.
end up with this scenario that we've seen so many times, right? Where these guys spend $200,000 and then throw the system out because it didn't do what they wanted in the first place.
Right. Right. I'm reminded of a story of a manufacturing company, and the owner would get frustrated because he would walk out uh, and he would see various things and he'd point it out and keep things on track. And he says, I can't understand why a system can't do this for me. And so, to your point, asked him to sit down and, when you take that walk, what do you do? Well, he couldn't. He
Right.
just, he's like, I've been doing it so long, I just see this stuff. So somebody followed him. And, I think they had plastic resin with part of their raw materials. As he goes by one bin, he puts his hand in it. And so I said, how come you put your hand in it? Well, I can tell if it's too hot, it's going to hold up production, or if it's too moist, it's going to plug up the machines. You know, all this was intuitive to him because he'd been there.
Right.
And so at every step along the way, they identified many different measurements, things that could be done to help automate and make sure that the process fell within appropriate measurements guidelines so that it would be successful and flow properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's the whole wonderfulness about people who really understand. It's like AI is a great concept, but you know, we are the eye. The intelligence has got to come from deep experienced people who can
Yeah.
talk about processes with critical thinking and figure out what optimal flow is. You know,
Hmm.
so absolutely, I think we'll call it an end for today, Tim. On that
All right.
note, and most excellent. I think this has certainly brought up some good points for folks, and we'll let them understand more about how to increase their margin for manufacturing, distribution, or whoever else. I mean, a lot of these things certainly are cross industry.
Right. Oh,
Well,
definitely.
thanks very much.
Oh, you're welcome.